Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us, and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Good morning. This morning's reading comes from Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night and provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it out of her earnings and plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hands she holds the distaff and grasps the spindles with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed, and she is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. May the Lord bless the reading and the hearing of his word.
My mom taught me that there are no strangers. We often find ourselves striking up conversations with whoever we're in line with, at the grocery store, you name it. But she also taught me to make my bed every morning, to accomplish something and start your day out right.
My mother always told me, forward ever, backward never.
My mother had a very strict curfew. We had to be home by 11:30 at night. Actually, even on the night before I was married, I had to be home by 11:30 at night. She said that nothing good happens after midnight unless you are a thief.
My mother always told me when I went out on a date to have money that I could always get back home.
What I remember is my mom saying very quietly, you know, it really doesn't do any good to try and run away from your problems.
My mother was a strong woman who raised strong women, and I in turn raised a strong daughter. My mother always taught me, we can be anything, we can do anything. She was a great lady.
The wisdom that my mother shared with me wasn't something that she told me per se, but something that she has always shown. And that's to be willing to serve others, especially when you're not going to be praised or applauded for it, when you're not going to get the recognition, because this is serving as Jesus served.
My mom always told me, as I was raising my children, to always surround them with people who love them. Thanks, Mom.
I'm joined this morning by Reverend Kim King and Reverend Jamalyn Peigh-Williamson, my wife. And the reason they're joining me is for a handful of reasons. First, I don't know how many of you know, it's in the looping slides in the morning, but the two of them do a podcast called One Thing More every week, or close to every week, where they kind of reflect on the message and from Sunday and how to apply it in different ways. And so in some ways, this is kind of fun because it's like bringing the podcast into the message on Sunday morning. Also, if you have missed the announcement from Amy Connolly a handful of weeks ago, Kim and Jamalyn are both kind of joining the pastoral staff. Kim's already been part of the pastoral, but increasing that role, and Jamalyn's going to be joining the pastoral staff here at our church. His official date is start of July, so this is kind of like a teaser a little bit.
We should say it's part-time, too.
Yes, part-time.
Let's not get crazy.
So the reason I asked him, though, is because I chose for this morning Proverbs 31, to preach on Proverbs 31. And I chose it because we're spending time in the wisdom literature of the Bible. Last week we did Proverbs 3 with our confirmation class. Next week we're going to move to Ecclesiastes for our graduate Sunday. But today we're doing Proverbs 31. And I asked Kim and Jamalyn to join me because it is a doozy of a passage. Like, if you Google Proverbs 31, you're going to see all kinds of stuff about a Proverbs 31 woman, like this picture of biblical womanhood and it's, you'll see not just pictures, but you'll see articles, blogs, books, videos, even whole ministries named Proverbs 31 ministries, all designed around, kind of building women up into this ideal of biblical womanhood. One church I looked, I was just kind of looking through, and I found one church where the pastor preached a 7-part series on Proverbs 31, and he entitled the whole series, A Competent Wife.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that at Zionsville.
Huh?
We're not doing that at Zionsville.
No, we're not. So
was it a male or female?
It was, of course, it was a male pastor. And it was like A Competent Wife, part 1, A Competent Wife, part 2. And I was imagining if I were for 7 weeks to mansplain how to be a competent wife,
You would have been single.
I would have been at the end. Yes. I wouldn't have gotten through it, I don't think. Anyway, so I asked Jamalyn and Kim to be part of this because I felt like, if we're going to talk about what it means, what biblical womanhood is, I need your perspective. I need your help to kind of talk about this. So the first question I have for you is when you read Proverbs 31, and the hope I want to lift up for you is this, is that picture, biblical womanhood, it's not exactly what you think it is. So that's what we're going to talk about. So when you read Proverbs 31, what's your first impression that you had when I told you, hey, we're going to preach on this? What's your first thoughts?
Well, my first thought was you asked me, when you think of Proverbs 31, what do you think? And I said, the first word that popped into my head was unattainable. It seems like a really long checklist of things you're supposed to be really good at. And it seemed kind of exhausting. In this Bible, it says, ode to a capable wife.
Yeah, so that's where I guess the guy got his title from, right? Yeah. So, it feels like a big, long checklist, right?
Yeah.
What about you, Kim?
So when I think of it, I think this is a book of wisdom and I should be wise and think before I speak, because if I spoke first, I might not say something helpful about this text. But then if I, think more, I have lots of questions. So I have questions, and even just hearing the scripture read again, second time this morning by a different voice, I heard different things, but I think that this is a text that is not about one woman at one time. And so I have lots of questions, like if she's buying fields and caring for her servants and, cooking and cleaning and all the things, is she doing those things herself, or does she have a staff of folks who are doing some of those things with and for her? And so she's managing the whole operation, not necessarily completing every task on her own. So I just have lots of questions.
Right. Clearly, this woman is a woman of means,
Yeah.
whoever this Proverbs 31 woman is, because she has servants. She has...
And even it talks about her clothing, it's purple and...
and only royals wore purple, yeah.
Right.
Her food comes from far away.
Yeah. She's got a little
bit of money.
She's got a little help and a lot of resources.
Yeah, so maybe the way she does all that stuff is because she has people who help
I
her.
could get a lot done if I had a staff.
That's what our kids do, right?
No, I said a real staff. Like, let people, yeah.
So, one thing I think is helpful is to understand that this ode to womanhood is that it's an acrostic poem. An acrostic means like each verse begins with a new letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and this is not the only acrostic poem in the Bible. There are lots of them. The most famous is Psalm 119, which has 8 verses for each letter of the alphabet, so it's 176 verses long. So part of its length is because that's just how many letters there are in the alphabet. Like if I were to say, write an acrostic poem in honor of mothers using the English alphabet, then you'd have to come up with 26 sentences, and good luck with X and Z, right?
I couldn't get my kids to record a 30-second ode to me. Like, they're on their phones all day long. Neither one of them could say how awesome I am. I'm not getting 26 letters.
Right. So that's one of the reasons, though, it's so long, and it feels overwhelming because it feels like, there's this, like, you have all these things you have to match up. And not only that, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but when I read Proverbs 31, a lot of the activities described don't seem to match very well with today's women, like the modern women, like
a capable wife.
A capable wife. But even the verbs, they're like, she spindles, she sells, she sews, like she does a lot of things. And I think about women today whose domain is much larger than just the household, and especially women who are pursuing careers or balancing office and home. And like it's really, here's a question I didn't ask in the first service.
Oh, okay.
So brand new question. So if you had to think of a few verbs that women do today that are missing from this passage, like what are some of the verbs you think of that women have to do today?
Carpool.
I was going to say drive was my very first word. That's crazy.
Carpool.
Drive. I run a small Uber business.
Yeah.
Wash.
Yeah.
I feel like she had a staff that was washing her clothes, washing.
She made the fabric, and then she made things out of the fabric. So
right. She spindled.
I'm so grateful for TJ Maxx.
Yeah.
Yeah. So shop, I guess.
Shop, yeah.
Cook.
You managed. In our household, you're the keeper of the calendar.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm the CEO of our household.
Yeah.
So it has to go to committee before a decision can be made, and I'm the committee.
like people call, like my friends will call me and say, "Hey, can you do something on this day?" I'm like, "Let me check."
Yeah. But yeah, like organize. There's a lot of moving parts.
And also, I think balance a life outside of your family. If you have a career, you're balancing that along with the life of your family too, and those overlap, but they don't always, overlap well, or there are challenges with that.
Yeah. So, I think part of it, I guess what I'm trying to say about Proverbs 31 is it paints this like unattainable picture, right? But I think there's also sometimes people read it and go, I don't want to live into that picture because that's not the kind of woman I want to be. And so what I want to do this morning is try to say, well, let's not worry about the details of the picture. Let's kind of understand the spirit of this passage. And then we can kind of think, well, how does it apply to our lives and our community and to Mother's Day? So the first thing I want to say about this passage is I think we misapply it because we make it into a job description. Mm-hmm. Like we misunderstand the audience for which it was intended. I read a blog post by Rachel Held Evans who made this basic point. Her point was this, that Proverbs 31 was not written for women. It was written for men to celebrate the value and see the value that women bring to their lives. And so she says she kind of came to this understanding by having a conversation with a friend of hers who's in the Jewish faith, who shared that in her context, in her faith tradition, men memorize Proverbs 31. And she kind of said, can you imagine like men's conferences, Promise Keepers, that they're preaching on Proverbs 31 and making men memorize Proverbs 31. But she said that's what men, because men would memorize this as a way of becoming more aware of the, not just their wives, but their mothers, their daughters, their sisters, their friends, everyone who brings value. And it was intended to be a song of praise to them. And her friend said, actually, my husband sings this song to me every Sabbath meal. Can you, so like imagine that. Go home for Mother's Day, guys, and sing Proverbs 31 to your wives, But it's intended as a song of praise. And so Rachel Held Evans writes this. She said, the only imperative, the only command that you find in Proverbs 31 is not directed to women. It's directed to men. Praise her for all her hands have done. And so then she says, as a song of praise, Proverbs 31 should not be interpreted prescriptively as a job description for all women, but instead its purpose is to celebrate women in action and to call forth from the community of faith a celebration of women, right?
Yeah.
So if you take that understanding, if you think of it not as a job description, but as a celebration of women in action, I'm just curious, does that change it for you? What parts of the passage do you find empowering and joyful and not like burdensome?
Well, I like anybody singing to me, so I'm going to be fine with that. It changes it for me because it's celebrating the things and not setting an expectation for what should be done. So that changes it a lot for me.
Yeah, so I think what happens for me is it expands the possibility of this text. And if this is a community of women working together, we don't all have to have exactly the same skill sets, but we will use our skill sets to enhance the community. There will be synergy created between us. And so the possibility that there's this wisdom of women that works, to better the community is empowering to me.
So it's not one person who has to embody
Right.
all of this, but it's a community, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of embodying this.
I like that I don't have to spindle.
That you don't have to spindle?
Right. That somebody else could spindle for me. I like that.
I don't even know how to spindle.
We have a neighbor who has a loom in our neighborhood. She goes to church here. I don't know if she's here, but she can be the one to spindle.
Yeah. You like to quilt.
Yeah, but that's not spindling.
No, I know it's not, but you do it because you enjoy it,
Yes.
not because if it became an expectation, I think the joy of that would disappear, right?
Well, we'll never know.
Yeah. Well put. So what in the, when you look, it's celebrating women, so what part of it do you find empowering?
Well, I like the idea of being, like I said, the CEO of the household. I have to laugh because I have a friend who a couple years ago on Facebook posted, I think it was a happy birthday message to his wife. And he's like, she's always the first up and the last to go to bed. And she makes sure our kids have everything they need. And, she makes sure that we're just, that our house is in order and all this stuff. And I'm reading it and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you not helping her? Like, let her sleep in every once in a while.
I don't remember which particular friend did that, but I remember you read it to me at the time, and it did two things to me. One, it made me realize, like, oh, I'm not nearly as, like, A, I don't really do social media or Facebook, but B, like, I think sometimes I'm not as good as this particular husband was at singing your praises, but...
Well, now we've moved into marriage therapy, so Kim, would you like to talk about that with us?
But the next thing I thought about was like, but I do think there are different norms and standards for men and women around this, that is... Like, men aren't expected sometimes to do a lot of these things. Like, I know I felt like a hero every time I changed the diaper, right? Like, I was like, yeah, look at me. I'm contributing. I'm helping here, And I found this meme. You guys remember the Dos Equis guys, the world's most remarkable man? And this is what, I don't always change a dirty diaper, but when I do, I use half the baby wipes. So like men this isn't something we necessarily know. But I think these roles are changing where there is this kind of expectation of or not even expectation, but for me, it's joy to be able to participate in those things. So I think these boundaries are breaking down where men get to participate in these things, but there's still a celebration of, there's still a need, I think, to celebrate and praise what women do. What about you, Kim? What do you find empowering?
What I find empowering about this is that this, first of all, it's a book on wisdom and how to be wise and how to live with wisdom. And a woman is a primary example of how that gets lived out in real life. So I find that empowering, that these are things we can do. And also that I don't think these are things that we necessarily know how to do on day one of being married or having a baby or whatever it is, or work. Like, we don't know all these things on day one, because wisdom is something that's gained over time.
It's something shared.
So all these attributes are like gained over time. Yeah, I learn from you, you learn from me. Yeah, and women are pretty good at that.
I think about that a lot, because when you have children, you know, most people are young, and all of a sudden you're supposed to know a lot about a lot of different things, which wasn't the case for me. I mean, I really relied on a lot of help to keep my babies alive. And it wasn't always the most enjoyable part of my life when I look back. Like, I'm much better as a teenage mom than I was
as a mom of teenagers.
Oh, yes, a mother of teenagers. Thank you. Boy, that's a big difference.
Yeah, no judgment here.
Right. I mean, you know, but then when I had babies, I mean, that was not the most enjoyable period. And now I have wisdom to look back and say, that's just a stage, you know, that there's going to be probably other stages I'm not as awesome at. So, you know,
I mean,
it's a journey. And that's what I like about this text, is that it is a journey as you read through it.
Yeah, if you read it as a journey and not as a picture of one woman at one moment in time, you know, and I think...
Or one day. I think when I read it originally, I think she did this all in one day.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like that, because she wakes up, you know, early, and she goes to bed at the wee hours of the night.
Dark,
like,
right?
Yeah, while it's still dark. So
her candle never turns off.
I know. Who's keeping the fire burning?
Yeah. So it seemed like, that's why I said unattainable. I mean, that's a lot to do in one day. If I think, well, she did this over the course of time with the staff, I feel like there should just be like a little italics at the beginning.
Well, and I think, you know, kind of back to what you were just saying, is like we double down on this as a culture of say, like we send these messages like, this is the best time of your life. Like, you know, this being a mom or being a dad. And like, but you send these messages like, we don't give people permission to struggle.
Right.
We don't give people permission to like, oh, this is hard. This is not easy. Yeah. And, you know, and I've failed and screwed up in big ways. I guess I'm not a Proverbs 31 woman, or I'm not even sure what the equivalent would be for a man, but like, you know, like it's not, we don't give people permission to struggle and say it's hard. And then that's where we lose that community of support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the verse the insight I had that you were talking about earlier, the Hebrew thing, came from Rachel Held Evans.
Here it comes, everybody.
Yeah, here it comes. So she kind of zeroed in on the opening words of the passage, a virtuous woman who can find. And she says, we kind of misinterpret this because the Hebrew phrase is Eshet Kayil, which means woman of valor. And like the male counterpart to this is Gibor Kayil, men of valor. And when you think of men of valor, you think of like these, like in the Old Testament, they're these warriors, they're strong men, they're kings, they're, you know, to protect the people. And then when we get to using the same phrase regarding women, instead of saying women of valor, we say a virtuous woman. And at least for me, there's a big difference between those two words of virtue and valor. Like for you guys, what do you hear when you hear those words, virtue and valor?
Yeah, for me, virtue feels like someone's going to give me a list of tasks or skills that I have to attain, and then they get to decide if I've done that or not, and they sort of bestow virtue upon me. Whereas valor feels more active and self-directed, like I get to participate and do a thing, you know?
Yeah.
Virtuous for me is sort of like a G movie. And valor would be like an action-packed, maybe PG-13. Like, I feel like virtuous is like this perfect, pure person, and that feels way far away.
Yeah, and valor is Joan of Arc or Captain
Right,
Marvel.
yes, yeah.
Like
Captain
a
Marvel,
hero.
PG-13, there could be some action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's...
And some struggle, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Valor speaks to bravery and strength. And I think, and so Rachel Held Evans' point is that when we understand it as women of valor, like she says, valor isn't about what you do, it's about how you do it. It's remarkably inclusive because it includes women at every age and every stage of life, young or old, has children, doesn't have children, all across the board. She says, if you're a stay-at-home mom, be a stay-at-home mom of valor. If you're a nurse, be a nurse of valor. If you're a CEO, a pastor, a barista at Starbucks, if you're rich or poor, single or married, do it all with valor. And so she kind of adopted this phrase, this Hebrew phrase, Eshet Kayil, and she said, I started using it to praise the women I knew. So a friend who finished seminary, Eshet Kayil, women of valor. When her sister finished running a half marathon, women of valor. When her mom beat cancer, women of valor. It became this celebration. And I think that's one of the hopes I have for you if you take as a takeaway from today is to think about how do I live with valor in whatever situation I may be in, whatever I may be facing, how do I approach it with valor?
Yeah.
So, and I forgot about this. So she points to a biblical character. She's, and the biblical character of Ruth. And she makes the observation that Ruth, when you think about Ruth, in some ways was nothing like a Proverbs 31 woman. Nope. She was not rich. She didn't have a husband. Her husband had died. She had no children. She was a foreigner, an outsider. She didn't have land or servants. She couldn't consider a field and buy it because she was the one working the edge of the field with all the other poor outcasts at gleaning what was left after the harvest, trying to make ends meet. And yet, Boaz, when he saw Ruth and saw who she was and how she lived, he said to her, all the people of my town know that you are a woman of character. Now you know, because you've been doing a little Hebrew study this morning. Woman of character is not a virtuous woman. The Hebrew phrase is a shet kayil. Everyone can see, everyone knows that you are a woman of valor. You live with bravery and strength. And that's what the Proverbs 31 woman is about, someone who lives with valor in all the activities of life.
Yeah.
So here's a question that I have for you guys. It's Mother's Day. So when you think about your mothers, how do you see them as a woman of valor? Like what verse in this passage kind of speaks to your moms?
For me, it's verse 20. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. So I think growing up, my mom graduated from nursing school and got her first RN license in 1956. And in her nursing program, she lived in a segregated dorm because that's the way things were back then. She became a nurse practitioner, so she was that for most of the time that I remember growing up. But she usually worked in community medical clinics, working with people who are marginalized.
Did you say in the Fountain Square area?
Yeah, Fountain Square area. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so, I mean, still now, today, like my mom is she's 87. She'll be 88 this year. I misspoke last service. But people will say, oh, hey, Mrs. Ferguson, I remember you from, so-and-so clinic. But yeah, that always, like my mom was always being a missionary in our community, sort of. And even now in her senior community at 87, like people are always asking her to like bandage up something or look at this or that. And I'm like, Ma, you're 88. Like, you probably shouldn't be like still, giving medical care to people. but that's just always kind of been her mission, so.
Yeah. And so we didn't participate in the video because we knew we'd have this opportunity to share like our mom's wisdom. So what was the phrase that your mom said to you?
Yeah, so I was like really when Dave asked us this question last week, I was like, oh, I remember a phrase, but it's probably not one I should share on video. And then yesterday, my sister, my daughter, my mom, and I had lunch together for Mother's Day, and I asked my sister just to check in to see if the phrase I remembered was the same one she remembered. And I said, what is something Mom said to us when we were growing up? And she was like, don't be smelling yourself. And I was like, that's the one I remember too. And I'm like, what does that even mean, right? And so we decided that it meant, get your humility back. Don't, think you're too big for your britches, or that you're all that in a bag of chips. Like, bring it down, sis. So that's the one that we remember my mom saying to us.
When you first showed me that phrase, I was like doing smell fees. Like, am I okay? Don't be smelling yourself.
Yeah, her answer would be, no, you're not in that moment.
Which also brings a little humility too. If you do a smell check.
Yeah.
What about you, Jamalyn?
I love that one for my mom too, but I went with verse 25. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. And I picked this one. My mom has become the matriarch of the family in many ways, and as that has occurred, a lot of my cousins call, and nieces and nephews, her nieces and nephews just kind of turning to her for advice and help. And she does really well in a crisis. She rises to the occasion. She's definitely someone who runs in the fire, not out of it. And so I thought that really reminded me of her. Also, she's very good at laughing at herself and helping you remember to not take yourself too seriously, and just teaching us that, at the end of the day, if you can't laugh at yourself, then, you may need to find a Nana to ask why that is.
Yeah. And I think we've had this experience because Nana's kind of been part of every church where we've been at. And she just knows everybody, and everyone knows her in the way of people are sometimes people have gotten to know us through Nana. We're not Yeah. So.
Well, and the advice, I laughed because mine is kind of weird, like yours is with your mom's. Mine was never leave the house without lipstick on, which I'm realizing I did not reapply before this service, and so I'm feeling a little. But my best friend from growing up in life said she thought that was funny because that's what she would have said the wisdom my mom gave her too was always leave with lipstick on. I don't know what lipstick has to do with it, but.
Well, so the funny part about that is, the video you guys saw at the beginning, Lois was in there. She was the one who talked about the curfew at 11:30. And when I shot that, she said, "Oh, I don't have my lipstick on." I said, "It's okay." And then later on in the day, she went home, put lipstick on, got dressed up, and then reshot the video. So we would have a one with lipstick on. So my mom's phrase as I was growing up was, she borrowed it from my grandmother, my dad's mom, but the phrase I remember most is "be sweet." That was just her phrase. Be sweet, be sweet. Even now, I'll be playing video games with Nathan, and it gets a little heated, when we're playing a video game, and sometimes we can, our voices rise, and especially if I lose the game for us, he'll kind of yell at me a little bit, and I can defend myself. And so Mom will be shouting, "Be sweet, be sweet," But the verse from Proverbs I think of is the same as yours, Kim, about opening her arms to the poor. So my mom is definitely a woman of valor, I think, because when my dad died when I was the age of 6, she took on the challenge of raising 2 boys. And she leaned a lot on my grandmothers, to kind of help with that. She had a community supporter, but she was definitely one of them. So she was a teacher. And one of the things that she did, I don't know if she got paid for it or whether it was volunteer work, but in our community, she taught the English as a second language classes for adults. And so I a couple nights a week, she was always teaching ESL classes, and I remember, when we were little, or even into our teens, when we would go out to eat in our town, whether it was the Mexican restaurant or the Chinese restaurant or the Olympic Steakhouse, those are kind of the options in my small town of Tennessee. Every time we went, when we would sit down to eat, at some point early in the meal, someone would bring over a plate, an appetizer, or one of my mom's favorite dishes, and it would be sent from someone in the kitchen or someone, because that's where a lot of the migrant community found work in my community, was in the restaurant industry. And they always sent something to Mom because they wanted to honor her and thank her. And I remember every time my mom would get up and she'd go and she'd, I'm sure sanitation laws weren't too happy, but she'd go in the kitchen and she'd talk to whoever, but she was always, and as a kid, I had a front row seat to that, And so now, it's no surprise really. I think that we went to Haiti, and I became an English teacher there, and now every Sunday after church, we go and we teach English to the Haitian community on the east side of Indianapolis, and they do the same thing. They always present gifts, and sometimes it's a 6-pack of Prestige beer, which is the Haitian beer. Sometimes it's pickles, like a tub of like Haitian slaw, but every time they give us one of these gifts, I think about my mom, and I think about how I grew up watching men and women present her with gifts as a way of saying thank you for investing in their lives. And I know, I'm doing this partly because of that example and witness that she gave to me. And so this is the homework that I want to give to each of you, is read Proverbs 31 and pick a verse, same as we've all done. Pick some verse that speaks to your mom. And then what you do with that, well, if your mom is living, give her a call and say, hey, Mom, today in church, this was read, and this is the verse that I thought of with regards to you, and share that with her as a way of thanking her and praising her. If your mother is no longer living, then find a community, whether it's your sisters and brothers or maybe your children, to share that with, and as a way of kind of celebrating and remembering what your mom taught you and gave you. Because that's what it's about, is celebrating the women of valor around us and what they've given to us, and how we are also called to live with valor in their honor. So I close with these words, the closing words of Proverbs 31. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. For charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. So give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Amen.
Good morning. My name is John Elligood, and I'm the Director of Communications here at Zionsville UMC. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to get to know you more and spend some time with you. If you'd like to know more about our faith community, please visit our church website at zumc.org. There, you'll find the many ministry opportunities that we have to offer. If you need to contact one of our staff members, all our contact information is at the bottom of all of the church web pages. You can also connect with us via social media throughout the week for daily inspiration and community. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under username Zionsville UMC. Once again, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we hope that you have a great week.